Hello and welcome to Darkest of the North. This is my first video where I plan on talking about various cases that have occurred in the Scandinavian countries of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. I also plan on talking about Nordic mythology, urban legends, and cursed places in future videos, so stay tuned for that. With that said, sit back, grab a warm drink, and let's begin with the first case. This is the tragic case of the double human Vilhelmine Møller. On the cold February evening in Østerbro, København, or Copenhagen, Denmark, 1893, lights lit from candles could be seen from the outside of a building. It was an orphanage that went by the name Kana. Inside, the air was filled with the laughter of children, little boys to be exact, little boys of all ages. All of them lived there for various reasons, some for being abandoned, others for losing their parents, or just not being able to afford staying with their family. Either way, despite their sad backgrounds, that evening in particular was not meant to be a sad one, for they were celebrating the birthday of one of the boys, and all of them were assembled to sing for him. Meanwhile, surrounding a punch bowl were the oldest boys, aged between 14 and 15. As they were the oldest, they were allowed to try a little bit of alcohol, this punch in particular being a mixture of cordial and rum. Among them taking a sip of the strong mixture was 15-year-old Volmer. While he was celebrating the younger boy's birthday, he was also somewhat celebrating the fact that he himself was officially a young man. In fact, he was soon going to be leaving the orphanage and moving to a different city where he would be working as an apprentice. Volmer was excited for his future. Kana orphanage had been his home since he was 2 years old, and the head mistress, Vilhelmine Møller, had pretty much been the best mother figure he could have asked for. In fact, all of the children living in Kana adored Vilhelmine. She was very nice and very gentle, and was firmly against corporal punishment, despite it being the expected form of discipline used by all adults back then. But not by Vilhelmine. She had made it her mission to make all of the children in the orphanage feel loved and cared for. And so naturally, Volmer trusted her wholeheartedly, not suspecting a single thing when he alone was given a separate glass from his peers. Vilhelmine said that because he would be leaving soon, he could have something even stronger. Not liking the excruciatingly bitter flavor though, Volmer tried to give the glass back, not wanting to drink the rest. However, Vilhelmine pushed, claiming that if he was to be a man, he had to start acting like one and get used to real strong liquor. And so, Volmer, not wanting to disappoint his foster mother, drank the rest of the awful drink. Not long after, though, he began to feel very sick, and so Vilhelmine had him sent upstairs to bed. The young Volmer laid in bed, eyes closed and hoping for the pain to soon go away, before he eventually drifted off to a deep sleep. Little did he know that he would not ever get to leave the orphanage or even see another sunrise, for the very next morning, Volmer would be found unresponsive. Volmer Sygren's death would lead to one of Denmark's most controversial cases, as the murderer themselves was unlike any other they had ever seen. Frederikke Vilhelmine Møller was born into a very poor family on the 8th of October 1845. And for the first few years of her life, Vilhelmine was loved and treated like any other child her age. However, as she grew, it was quickly noticed that there was something very different about her. As her toddler years came and went, as her body and facial features started to develop, her mother and father took notice of how she differed from the other girls her age. She wasn't a small and delicate-looking little girl like her mother had hoped for. In fact, she grew tall and robust-looking, very quickly surpassing the boys her age. Her face was not what her mother had expected in a little girl either. She wasn't doll-like, with big eyes and a little button nose, but quite the opposite. And unfortunately, already at a very young age, Vilhelmine was loudly called ugly. Not just by her peers, neighbors, or family members, but also her very own mother. In fact, her mother was straight up ashamed of her supposed manly daughter. And she made sure to remind her of this every single day. Any attempt of affection Vilhelmine sought from her mother was rejected, leaving her feeling cold and unloved. While Vilhelmine was shunned from her family, she sought comfort in God, as well as learning. Through the little time she was sent to school, it was clear that she was very academically gifted and overall curious to learn. Unfortunately for Vilhelmine, though, her parents, or mainly her mother, never bothered noticing her potential, focusing instead on the fact that she was not fitting into any beauty standard. For as she grew, she kept getting more and more ugly, or so her heartless mother claimed. As all of Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, have been mainly countries of Christian faith, hence the crosses in their flags, they celebrate the transition ritual known as confirmation, which is an affirmation of their faith in God. However, what is usually considered more important for young people and their families is the fact that it is also considered the transition ritual from a child to an adult, which usually occurs between the ages of 13 to 16. A confirmation is held in church on a Sunday during the spring, and after the ceremony, family members will hold speeches, music will be played, and feasts are enjoyed. It is overall meant to be a grand celebratory event for the new adult, and is therefore something children usually very much look forward to. Vilhelmine, who had been raised a Christian, was very much looking forward to a confirmation of her own, just like every other one of her peers. However, her parents, who wanted absolutely nothing to do with her, saw no point in investing any time or money for a confirmation for their daughter, and instead tried getting rid of her as soon as she matured, and at the age of 14, she was quickly sent away from her home and out of their sight in order to work as a maid. At first sight, when meeting Vilhelmine Møller, it would not be uncommon to assume that the young woman was strong. With her towering height, large hands, and overall larger and more robust build, one would assume that she would do a great job as a maid. However, not long after Vilhelmine was put to work in her new home as a maid, was it clear as day that this was not the case. In fact, the young girl was incredibly clumsy. She fumbled and dropped and accidentally hit so many things that the items left broken would sadly become the norm. It was so bad that for the first 6 months of work, Vilhelmine did not get any payment whatsoever, and instead she was left with a bill for the many various things she had broken. In my opinion, I believe the sudden move, being sent away from her parents to live with strangers and work, must have been an overwhelming transition for the only 14-year-old Vilhelmine. I'm unsure of how experienced she already was with cleaning. For all we know, she could have been new to everything. Also, considering the fact that she was very tall. I remember my own childhood and teenage years as a tall girl. I was rather clumsy myself. Because I grew so fast compared to my classmates, it felt as if my brain could not quite catch up with the sudden change of longer limbs and an awkward spatial awareness. It took some time to adjust, but it is safe to say that I no longer live up to my nickname Bambi. However, I was lucky to have had supportive and understanding parents, as well as teachers. The same could not be said for poor Vilhelmine, though. She had already felt so unwanted her whole life, and being sent away to be completely alone with strangers was definitely not a good way to help her develop healthily. In fact, it was just further confirmed to her of how different and wrong she was. That not only did she look different, but that she could supposedly never be good enough. Eventually, Vilhelmine would be fired from her first job, sending her looking for work as a maid elsewhere. Being in debt and not earning much, or even enough, eventually left Vilhelmine feeling desperate. And so, she wound up seeing theft as an option, and at the age of 20, while trying to steal, she was caught red-handed by her employer. It is unclear whether or not Vilhelmine had stolen anything prior to this, or if she had simply been caught on her first attempt due to her clumsiness. Either way, for her punishment, she was sentenced to 10 days in prison. While incarcerated, Vilhelmine was overwhelmed by the other women there, as they mainly consisted of prostitutes. They shamelessly shared their crimes with each other, as well as the many horrid experiences they had been through due to their line of work and overall treatment by society. Vilhelmine, who had grown up learning her values through Christianity, as well as overall lack of experiences with men, was horrified by the things she learned from the other women, taking it all in and seeing the world from a completely different perspective. Particularly, it gave her a new perspective on men and their treatment of women. And for the first time in her life, she began to somewhat see herself differently. While she was demeaned as a child for her masculine appearance, she began to see it as a form of blessing. For she understood that with beauty came other troubles, and even larger risks. Risks that she herself had been safe from, more so than the majority of women. Along with Vilhelmine's new views of the world, her belief in God was enhanced, and when her 10-day sentence had passed, she found herself even more motivated to pray and go to church consistently. And with this newfound motivation in life, Vilhelmine began to search for new jobs at farms as a maid. However, due to the bad references of her previous jobs, it became hard for her to find long-term employment, and was therefore forced to mainly work at short-period jobs here and there, which resulted in her life feeling unstable or rootless. Though what kept her going was her belief in God, and one day, while she visited a different church, she was taken aback by how kind and welcoming the people there were, treating her no differently than anyone else. It was also there she listened to a lecture that inspired her and helped her find her calling in life. She wanted to work with people, work with them in a way that gave her the opportunity to encourage and help others, physically and emotionally. She wanted to mimic the welcoming and warm feelings she felt at church, and give it to people who needed it the most. And Vilhelmine understood that the only way to be given the opportunities to fulfill this calling was to study. While she was barely given the chance as a child to go further in school, Vilhelmine knew that nothing and nobody could hold her back now, as she was determined to gain as much knowledge as she could. And so, she worked for a while in order to save up enough money to study at various community colleges. While studying, Vilhelmine flourished. Her brain took everything in like a sponge, and she was so happy with learning. Sadly though, the social aspect was not going too well. Just like her childhood, she felt left out, unable to really fit in into any group. Vilhelmine suspected that it still had to do with her appearance, as she was just so different looking from all of the other women her age. She would later claim that it was a very lonely time for her, despite being surrounded by so many. Luckily enough though, Despite her not-so-exciting social life at the community college, apart from her flourishing studies, Vilhelmine was able to make contacts. For her hard work and great results did not go unnoticed, and one day, one of these contacts came to think of her, and realized that she would make a great candidate for a particular position. A wholesaler named Møller Andersen, who Vilhelmine had met a while back during one of her various courses, had a passion for helping children, and in the year of 1877, he took the initiative to start his very own orphanage that he named Godthåb, meaning good hope in Danish. At the thought of Vilhelmine, he remembered her firm beliefs and determination wanting to help people with kindness and compassion, and the importance of treating everyone equally, no matter their appearance or background. And so, Møller came to the conclusion that Vilhelmine would make a great child caretaker at his orphanage. And when asked if she wanted the role, Vilhelmine was ecstatic and embraced her newfound job. When first introduced to the children of Godthåb, Vilhelmine was at first perceived by the children as a little scary and unapproachable due to her more masculine appearance. However, those feelings were quickly replaced with admiration the second they got to see her genuine self. Vilhelmine loved working as a child caretaker, and she was determined to give them all a childhood that she herself was denied. She would play with them, hug them, cuddle with them, listen to their problems, and so much more. The children themselves absolutely adored her, and she became the mother many of them never had. She was nice and fair and never laid a hand on any of them. On top of that, she was very skilled at keeping the children disciplined and the overall orphanage organized. And so, for the first time in Vilhelmine's life, she was perceived as a good worker and was constantly being praised for it. She had finally found her rightful place in life. Seeing how well she was doing at her job, Møller was very much pleased with his decision. He would go on to start yet another orphanage in 1880 called Kana, that would specifically be meant for orphaned boys. Vilhelmine was offered a higher position if she moved to Kana, where she would be working as the head mistress as well as be the overall foster mother for the orphaned boys. It was an offer she simply couldn't refuse, and so, while saddened to leave the children of Godthåb behind, she left them with wonderful memories and newfound hope. With her new position, Vilhelmine was finally able to be considered of high enough status to partake in more important matters of society, particularly within the debate of child rearing as well as women's rights, both of which she was very passionate about. In fact, she was so passionate about them that she regularly wrote articles, submissions, and was just overall engaged in the fight for the rights of women and children. Her passion for this led her to eventually being elected to be the first board of the Women's Suffrage Association in 1889 and sat there until 1890. Vilhelmine was simply put a modern woman, a person with a modern way of thinking. Her argument was, instead of harshly disciplining and forcing children to do things they didn't want, the best way to bond with a child was to simply think and act like one alongside them. Vilhelmine would constantly practice this in Kana. It was not uncommon to find her playing alongside them, such as leading them in a marching band, or helping them make their own weapons from wood if they wanted to play military, and so much more. Because of her active participation in these important matters, Vilhelmine quickly went from a looked down upon clumsy poor girl to a well-respected wise woman who children and adults alike turned to advice. Perhaps, if it had continued in this direction, Vilhelmine would have gone on to write more articles and perhaps even have caught the attention of high-positioned people. Maybe she would have been one of the greatest forces for the revolution of women and children alike in today's society. Sadly, we will never know, as Vilhelmine Møller would go on to commit the biggest mistake of her life, an action that, when coming to light, would shock the whole country of Denmark. At the beginning of Vilhelmine's journey as mistress and foster mother at Kana, among the many little boys that she was quick to take under her wings, was 2-year-old Volmer. He had been sent to Kana by his mother after her husband had recently passed away, leaving her a young widow and unable to care for her son Volmer. Just like the other boys of the orphanage, Volmer grew to like Vilhelmine very quickly and was even quicker to be attached to her by the hip. For unlike many of the other children, Volmer was very much an anxious child, so much so that he was completely unable to sleep by himself. And Vilhelmine, who wanted all of the children to feel safe and cared for, decided to allow the young Volmer to sleep with her in her bed, hoping that it would help him feel safe. And so this went on for nights, and eventually even years. Naturally, because of this, Volmer grew more and more attached to his foster mother, and perhaps it would have remained that way only, a wholesome memory, if Vilhelmine had set healthy boundaries when he was old enough to sleep by himself. Vilhelmine found herself unable to say no to Volmer. She was equally as attached to him as he was to her. And one night, while they slept side by side, when Volmer was 11 years old, he embraced his foster mother with his arms around her neck and was firmly pressed up against her body. It was that night, and with that action, that Vilhelmine suddenly felt something completely different. Warm feelings that she had never felt before in her life. It was intense, and most importantly, she knew it was wrong. Vilhelmine had never had a single romantic relationship in all of her life, leaving her hungry for intimate physical touch, which she didn't know about until Volmer accidentally activated it. She tried to fight it back, tried to reason with herself. She even wrote down her feelings into her notebook in hopes of releasing everything. But the warm feelings only grew and grew, until one night she found herself giving in to her feelings as the two of them shared kisses and tight hugs. While embracing each other, Vilhelmine would feel the young boy's erection pressed up against her, which made her feel giddy and excited. This went on for nights, weeks, months, and even years. And even though Vilhelmine felt that her feelings and needs kept growing stronger, she didn't stop herself. That is, until one day, when she was in the kitchen alone, Volmer ran up to her from behind and pressed his body firmly against hers. Upon this action, she felt his erection once more, but pressed up closer to her private area. In that moment, Vilhelmine's consciousness finally struck her as she realized just how wrong everything was and how far it was getting, and she had to put a stop to it right there and then. And so she struck Volmer, slapping him across the face. She felt horrible hurting him, but believed that that action alone would get through to him. And it did. Volmer was no longer allowed to sleep in Vilhelmine's bed, and while it was for the best, Vilhelmine found it incredibly difficult to separate herself from him, as she was so deeply fond of the young boy. But their relationship had not gone unnoticed by the other boys in Kana, and they would relentlessly tease Volmer about it. Vilhelmine tried to separate herself from Volmer and discipline the other children equally. But when one boy in particular continued to tease Volmer about sharing a bed with her, she couldn't contain her anger and slapped the boy to silence him. Around 1890, something else popped up that became a hot topic for the boys to gossip about, so much so that the supposed foster mother and son relationship no longer became the main focus. And that topic came in the form of a new aid worker at Kana, a woman who went by the name Maid. and when she met the headmistress and foster mother at Kana, Vilhelmine, it is said that there was an instant spark between the two. Vilhelmine and Mcvitz were quickly intrigued by each other, spending lots and lots of time by each other's side. One day, Vilhelmine went as far as to invite Mcvitz to share a bed together, which the woman in question happily said yes to. During the nights after that, the boys in Kana would giggle and gossip about the suspicious noises that would come from Vilhelmine's room. While I have not found much information about Vilhelmine and Mcvitz's relationship, it is highly suspected that they were intimate partners, and thus Vilhelmine's real first experience with intimacy. They worked side by side during the days and slept together at nights. Despite that Vilhelmine had finally managed to detach her forbidden feelings from Volmer, as she by then had a willing and legal partner, she couldn't stop thinking of what she had done, how she had felt, and how she had made Volmer feel. She was ashamed and scared. She worried that the truth would come out and completely ruin her wonderful life that she had finally built. But most importantly, she worried that her actions might have damaged the boy, that perhaps he would grow up to become a dangerous pervert and live a sinful life, similar to what she had heard the prostitutes talk about back from when she was in prison. Vilhelmine's fear and guilt grew day by day, so much so that she had extreme difficulty falling asleep, leaving her tired and almost a shell of herself during the day while she tried playing with the children. The orphanage's own doctor had then prescribed her with chloral hydrate, a sedative that was commonly taken back then in very small amounts in order to aid in insomnia as well as relieve anxiety. One day, while taking the incredibly bitter substance, it was then Vilhelmine was struck with an awful idea. If she killed Volmer, then she could save him from potentially developing into a sinful person that would have no hope and instead die a pure and innocent young man and live on in paradise. And the chloral hydrate was the perfect poison. It would give him a supposed all-natural death. And so, Vilhelmine began planning. She planned on what flowers, psalms, and practically everything she wanted to give Volmer in his casket. She even sewed a pillowcase made out of her own apron for him to have at his final rest. As morbid as this planning was, Vilhelmine did not view it like that. In fact, she felt at peace. In her mind, she was saving Volmer and ensuring a secure spot for him in heaven. Time was passing though, and they were quickly closing in on Volmer's confirmation day, to which he had been informed that after that, he would no longer be living in Kana. He was by then a 15-year-old young man, and could no longer be considered a child, and thus was eligible to work. In fact, he was told that he had been given an apprenticeship as a wagon maker further west of the city of Roskilde, a city that once was Denmark's capital until the year 1443. Upon this news, Volmer was ecstatic. Vilhelmine, on the other hand, began to stress. She knew that she had to work fast before he was sent away from Kana and away from Copenhagen. She needed to work fast, as well as try and find the perfect opportunity for her plan to unfold. And this opportunity finally came on the cold February night of 1893. There, she organized a bowl of punch for the oldest boys, claiming that it was finally time for them to experience alcohol as real men. While nobody was watching, Vilhelmine grabbed a glass of punch and pulled out her little bottle of chloral hydrate before pouring out a few drops into the glass. After that, she walked up to her favorite foster child, Volmer Sykren, and handed him the glass. Now, be a man and drink up," she told him, and watched as he forced himself to down the whole glass, coughing and commenting about how horrible it tasted. Not long after, Volmer began to feel dizzy and nauseous. Vilhelmine calmly then instructed one of the child caretakers to help him upstairs to her bed, where he would be allowed to rest in peace. Later that night, while Volmer was fast asleep in his foster mother's bed, she walked in. She stood over him, looking down at the young man who she had cared for as her own since he was a little toddler. Driven by what she perceived as out of love, she showed no hesitation upon her next actions, for she knew, or so she believed, that soon he would be free of all sin and free of all evil. She grabbed 2 blankets and proceeded to wrap them around his head. After that, getting a good grip on each side with her strong hands, she pulled as hard as she could until it was tight enough where she believed he would be left unable to breathe. And that is how she left him. Turning away, she walked out of the room and not once looking back. Unbeknownst to Vilhelmine, when she left, Volmer woke up. Panicked, he began to frantically pull and claw at the blankets, desperate to try and get a deep breath of air into his lungs. However, just as he managed to pull them off, it was too late, and Volmer Sykren sadly lost his life right then and there, at the young age of 15, and at the hands of the one person he saw as his mother. The very next day, while putting on the act of a devastated foster mother, Vilhelmine contacted the orphanage doctor to come and check on him. Sadly, the doctor ended up doing a careless job when doing the checkup and wound up determining that the cause of death was a blood clot and nothing else. He suspected nothing. It seemed as if Vilhelmine had gotten away scot-free, and she proceeded to start, or rather continue, the planning of Volmer's funeral, which was set to take place in March. While we might view it as incredibly disturbing that Volmer's own murderer was arranging his funeral, Vilhelmine, on the other hand, did not see it that way. She felt relieved that he had been freed of all sin, and now Volmer's soul was free and happy in heaven, and thus Vilhelmine was determined to give him the best and most beautiful funeral possible. Volmer Sykren was buried on the 5th of March 1893. He was carried in a beautiful yellow casket. With him, a cross adorned with flowers, hand-picked psalms, and much more. It was a funeral considered unusually grand for a person of Volmer's class, and when his sick mother, who was sadly unable to attend, was informed of this, while devastated, she felt honored that her son was given such a ceremony. Before the funeral, though, it did not take long for the rumors to be spread by the children of Kana. One boy in particular, who just so happened to be Volmer's roommate, had opened up to his mother during a visit about the supposed sexual relationship he most likely had with Kana's headmistress Vilhelmine. The boy's mother was horrified by this and quickly visited the wholesaler as well as the owner of the orphanage. Møller Andersen was shocked to have heard the news of such rumors. He believed it was nothing more than just that, and so Møller set off to inform Vilhelmine of the gossiping, thinking it was only fair that she heard it from him first, rather than accidentally coming across it herself. Vilhelmine's reaction to the news was shock. She went pale and lost her ability to speak. Before denying the claims, Møller never once suspected it to be true, though, and took the reaction as Vilhelmine being appalled and overall heartbroken over such a claim. Little did he know, though, that her reaction was out of fear, for Vilhelmine understood that they were catching on, and that it was only a matter of time. With this knowledge, Vilhelmine grew paranoid that any second she would be caught. In fact, she was so stressed she felt like she was losing her mind and therefore checked herself into a mental hospital. Out of concern for his distressed employee, the ever so kind and well-meaning Møller decided to take action against the rumors threatening to damage Vilhelmine's reputation. And he did so by contacting the law enforcement and asking them to do an official investigation into the matter, believing that it would clear Vilhelmine's name once and for all. However, it would end up doing the complete opposite. And so, not long after Vilhelmine's release from the hospital on the 22nd of March, she was informed of this investigation and was therefore required to be at the police station for questioning. There, while the main mission was to prove her innocence, the police grew quickly suspicious of the frantic Vilhelmine. Her explanations were inconsistent and incoherent. For each question she was given, her answer further convinced the authorities that something wasn't quite right. At first, it was expected that the interrogation with Vilhelmine would have been and done quickly, as they had been certain of her innocence. But due to the now growing suspicion they had no choice but to continue their investigation and dig deeper. The questions that had at first been simple and basic were switched with deeper and more provocative ones, pushing Vilhelmine until she finally broke. She confessed to everything. That yes, she had indeed had an inappropriate relationship with the young Volmer Sykren. This silenced the whole interrogation room. They were all in shock. Vilhelmine had preyed on a vulnerable child, all the while in a position where said child was meant to feel the most safe. With this newfound information, the police put two and two together and figured that perhaps in order to silence Volmer from having her secret revealed, perhaps Vilhelmine had been the one to murder him. Volmer's casket was dug up in order to give the body a proper examination, and as it turns out, they realized very quickly that the orphanage doctor had done a terrible job by concluding the boy's death so quickly, by claiming it to be nothing but a blood clot, when in fact it was clear as day that he had been suffocated. While the suspicion of Vilhelmine being the culprit of murder was strong, getting her to confess to it was not as easy. She was interrogated multiple times, one of which was even shown the body of Volmer. But even then, when seeing the dead body of him, she showed no reaction and continued to deny. It wasn't until a worship service at the prison church during Easter, where Vilhelmine was filled with such immense guilt, that she would finally break down and confess to everything. Almost all of Denmark followed the trial of Vilhelmine Møller in the press, as she had by then become such a known person in the child-rearing and women's rights movements. Though initially she had been admired by many, their opinions had now flipped with the horrible confessions. During the trial, while questioning why she murdered Volmer Sykren, Vilhelmine confessed that it was because she had destroyed him. So she had to kill him, or else he would have had an even worse fate in the afterlife. While this confession was perceived as bizarre, what later confused everyone even more was when questioning her about the perverse acts she had performed on Volmer. Upon the various questions of potential actions, Vilhelmine appeared more and more confused. It seemed as if she had no idea how intercourse even worked, or even how female parts worked. And so it was revealed that no penetration had in fact occurred. This completely baffled everyone, for if there had not in fact been any actual penetration, then had a crime even been committed in the headmistress's room? Vilhelmine sat in Copenhagen's prison for women. She spent her time sewing, writing, reading the Bible and praying. While there, she was regularly visited by a lawyer named Brun, who was sent there by the court. He asked her various new questions upon each visit, to which Vilhelmine tried answering to the best of her abilities. However, Brun had begun suspecting something completely new. Could it be that the tall, rough-looking woman with the deep voice and stubble was, in fact, a man? When Brun eventually straight up asked Vilhelmine of this, she was appalled, saying, "I am who I am, a woman near 50. God forgive you, judge." Her answer would not remove Brun's suspicions, though, as he was so certain that he was onto something. So much so that he organized a medical examination for Vilhelmine. On the 29th of September 1893, Vilhelmine was forced to undress, not only in front of the prison doctors, but in front of the lawyer Brun himself. Humiliated and scared, Vilhelmine stripped off everything and allowed the examination to start. It didn't take long to realize that on a superficial view, because there was a fold on each side and a gap in the middle, she looked female. However, when looked further and inspecting the folds, the doctors came to realize that they were in fact deformed testicles, and between them was a very small penis. With today's knowledge, Vilhelmine Møller would have been considered intersex, though sadly back then, there was no such thing. The doctor then concluded that because there were testes, therefore Vilhelmine was 100% a man. I can only imagine how Vilhelmine felt in that moment, being told what she supposedly really was, and how she felt had no say in the matter. And to make matters worse, it was quickly ordered that she officially changed her name from Vilhelmine to Vilhelmi, the masculine version of it, and be transferred to a man's prison. For the rest of this case, I shall refer to Vilhelmine, now Vilhelmi, out of respect as they/them, as it is unclear of what they eventually truly identified as. When transferred, Vilhelmi begged to be separated from the other prisoners out of fear of what they might do to them. This wish was thankfully granted, and Vilhelmi spent their days suing and praying. The news of Vilhelmine being a man became a straight-up sensation in the Danish press. The murderer and predator was, in fact, a man. Now, it all made sense. The verdict came 3 months later. Vilhelmine Møller was to be sentenced to death. Their lawyer argued that Vilhelmi had a long and suffering life, being a man while forced to live as a woman, shunned by society, and still tried to do well while being split in the soul. But the verdict wasn't changed. That is, until one very unsuspected person in particular came forward. King Christian IX of Denmark himself. The monarch had a habit of showing mercy and intervening with tragic cases, and he had been updated on the case of Vilhelmi. He was moved and so interjected that the verdict should be changed to life imprisonment instead. And so it was. Vilhelmi sat alone in their own cell, still afraid of the other prisoners. For 11 years, they sat there before a large number of votes were put forward for giving Vilhelmi an earlier release. The majority came from Vilhelmi's previous foster children. While Volmer had tragically lost his life, the many children, many now adults, had such fond and loving memories of their old foster mother that they argued that they had done enough time, that Vilhelmi had no longer needed to be punished. The previous foster children were so determined to get Vilhelmine out that they wrote many, many letters to the king. And so, in 1905, Vilhelmine was pardoned by the king himself. Considering everything Vilhelmine had been through, though, one would assume that perhaps their life would have been changed for the worst, even when released. The forced gender change, the humiliation, the fear, and overall regret of what they had done. There was one spark of light in their life, though, a spark of hope that, as a result, was a motivation to continue living life at its fullest. And that spark came in the form of a woman named Agnes Larsen. Agnes had met Vilhelmine while working as a prison guard in Copenhagen's prison for women. The two had apparently grown very fond of each other, and at some point, they even fell in love. Their relationship continued while Vilhelmine was transferred to the men's prison. Most likely, they kept in contact through letters. When Vilhelmine was pardoned by the king and thus released, they legally changed their name to Frederik Wilhelm Schmidt and went on to marry their prison guard love, Agnes. They would remain married until the day of Vilhelmine's death in 1936, when they were 91 years old. Vilhelmine was a person who was tragically treated terribly their whole life by everyone around them, depriving them of love and affection. And I believe if they had been treated better, then perhaps they would have never been so desperate for affection, even if it came from a child. And then perhaps Volmer never would have tragically lost his life at such a young age. Despite their crime, Vilhelmine truly loved working with children, and they truly wanted them to have a happy and loving childhood. At least, they finally got to be loved and treated the way they had always wished for in the end. As for the name of this case, it is said that after their sentence, when asked what they identify as, Vilhelmine would refer to themselves as a double human. Perhaps they identified as both man and woman, or as neither. This question, though, will never be answered. Though let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you for watching.